Hello, happy Friday. Another busy week in the world of Norwich City. Plenty of action across our Pink and YouTube channel. If you haven't already caught up with a lot of it, we've obviously had that exclusive interview with Mark Attanasio, which I think has gone down relatively well. So we, thank you for all the support on that. But this show is all about the transfer news surrounding Norwich City. We're going to try and unpack all of that over the sort of next 45 minutes or so. Adam Harvey, joined by Samuel Seaman and Connor Southwell. We want your comments. We want your questions. Get them all down below, and we'll try and answer as many as we can as we move through the show. Sam, let's talk first around the confirmation we had on Sunday evening of Borja Sainz departing Norwich City. He obviously made that move to Porto, £14.25 million, 20% sell-on clause in that as well. Feels like a good move for all parties and good to kind of get that saga over and done with.
Yeah, I was going to say when you mentioned it, I was thinking I can't believe that's happened since the last window watch, because it does feel like something that's dragged on for so long and that's felt inevitable for quite a while. Not only when it became clear that Porto were the front runners for Sainz, but also I think basically since the end of the season, it's been very clear that he would be the easiest sort of big name player for Norwich to move on this summer, that the interest was there from him and that probably Norwich wanted to do it as well. So it's something that we've been waiting for a long while, but I think when you reflect on the deal on the whole, I think they've done very, very well. For someone who primarily has got 12 months left on their deal, maybe was exposed a little bit in the second half of last season in terms of the inconsistency and the struggles that he had once he was sort of a known name. And the fact that obviously they signed him for free only 2 years ago. I think 14.25 million as a package is a very, very good one. I think for him, it works very well. As you said, it's sort of one that works for all parties. I think he gets the opportunity in a league where probably he has a decent chance of stepping up from the Championship and doing quite well. I think he was one where you looked at some of the clubs being linked, and the Premier League to me always felt like probably the least realistic option, because his weaknesses probably don't really lend themselves to the way that league plays out. But to go to a big club like Porto, where he'll be able to play Champions League football, but also be in a league that I think they'll obviously dominate most of their games, and he can be involved quite a lot, which I think he needs, really. I think it works for him as well. And obviously for Norwich's transfer business, I think what they got for him almost covers everything they've spent so far. So it's works quite well for them in terms of the profit and sustainability rules that Mark Attanasio referenced in that chat. Obviously, he's spoken a lot about the fact that resources aren't really going to be a problem, but they do probably need to keep that headroom so that they can manoeuvre every time they want to sign a player, and that certainly would have helped them. So it does feel like one that's dragged along for a while, that we've almost known the conclusion, and now to actually get it done, get it out of the way, and Norwich can, although they have been planning for life without him, can actually look at that squad without a sort of caveat added to it. I think it's positive in that sense as well. So as you said, good deal for all parties.
Yeah, now that Borja deal is over the line, Connor, I feel certainly that the noise around Josh Sargent is only going to grow, given he's kind of the next one maybe on that conveyor belt of potential exits out of the Carrow door this summer. I think Burnley and Wolfsburg have kind of been the two that are seemingly the front runners. No club-to-club agreement at this point. He is, of course, in Holland for this pre-season camp, so nothing moving particularly quickly on that. But, there's obviously been a lot more chatter this week. Where's your head at in terms of him and his future?
Yeah, probably where it's been at from the start, to be honest. I think we will, very rarely, not always, but very rarely do you get a situation where you have two clubs that are showing interest in one player and he ends up staying. So that for me feels like we're kind of going through the similar process that we went through with Borja Sainz, and now it's probably about one of those clubs now pushing to get that deal done. As of about an hour ago, that's as up to date as we can give you. There's been no change in that. There's been no agreement. He's trained this morning, it'll be interesting to see if obviously he's involved tomorrow, but certainly not at the level whereby things are happening where he's planning to leave Norwich's camp in the Netherlands and stuff like that. So I think you're right. I think it will intensify. I think one of these clubs, if not one of these clubs, and another, Udinese mentioned again, because I think they're pretty close to selling a big name striker for big money. So that could bring someone like that into the mix. You wouldn't discount that. And I think we're probably at a level where the interest is there and enough. And Ben Napper said it on Tuesday. It's now about getting to a stage where it's agreeable for Norwich and it's obviously agreeable for him. I think Josh Sargent would be probably open now to something fresh and a new challenge. You can understand that. It's a home World Cup year for him, and he's not been in the squad, so he needs to get himself in Pochettino's eyes. I don't think those international performances have probably helped him. And yeah, I think when you add all of that up, it feels unlikely to me that he'll still be a Norwich City player come the end of the window. But clearly we are not at a stage where, contracts are being signed or drafted up or paperwork exchanged or agreements reached. We're still very much in kind of the negotiation stage. And I still think there was earlier in the week when we checked, there was still quite a bit between the teams negotiating to where Norwich's sort of price tag is for him, I guess. So until that's reached, it's as was, and he remains a Norwich City player and in the building. So yeah, just to reiterate, very much still in training, and that will be the case until one of those clubs try and push this deal a bit quicker than what is happening at the moment. So yeah, I've been a bit surprised by some of the stuff that has been coming out in Germany, because it's definitely not at that stage where the clubs have agreed anything. He might have agreed with the clubs, and that's a different story. But yeah, certainly no club-to-club agreement as of 12:23 on Friday afternoon.
Yeah, I see a few people sort of mentioning questions around him. I think Aidzo saying, what percentage would you sort of feel that Sargent stays? And Scott asking, is the plan that Matthias would be the replacement for Sargent, or I suppose would Norwich dip back into the market? That was a question I think fielded to Ben Napper during the fans forum during the week, Sam. So if there is a route that Josh Sargent exits this summer, which feels pretty likely at this point, would you expect Norwich, I suppose, to dip back into the market and try and replace him directly, or try and utilise what they currently have in the squad?
Yeah, I think if we are going with percentages, I've got to say I'm probably at 15% or lower that he stays this summer. At the moment, I don't think it does feel particularly likely. And then in that case, as you said, Napper was asked that question at the fan forum on Tuesday night, and he did say basically that they would look to add to the forward line if Sargent went, but I think they see it more as a fluid front line rather than simply a central number 9 goes and a central number 9 is signed. I think you look at the sort of profiles they've added since Napper's come into the building. Ante Cianats is one who they see as primarily a number 9. They think he can play best in a central striker role, but obviously he can play out wide as well, and that was where he was for most of last season. It's the same with Quistgaarden, really. I think anyone looking at his career so far would say that he probably has played most and best through the middle, but clearly he's played a lot out on the left. And probably if you look at his sort of football upbringing, where he was at Arsenal for such a long time, they tended to do that as well in terms of having those wide players who can play through the middle as well. So I think if Sargent went, they would probably dip back into the market. We've talked about the fact that they certainly want at least one left winger, and obviously Pape Diallo is in the mix. I'm sure we'll come on to all of those names, but they also are thinking about potentially the Premier League loan route for another winger. And if I had to say now, I think it would be more likely if Sargent went that they would then move on a second winger. And that means that Quistgaarden wouldn't have to cover out wide, and probably he would end up being the Sargent replacement for most of it. Obviously, there's a lot of pre-season to play out. Quistgaarden hasn't even made his debut for the club yet, so I think it'll be interesting to see which position Manning plays him in, assuming he plays in one of these two fixtures tomorrow. But I would say more broadly to look at it as a sort of a front three or a forward line or a set of attacking options, rather than simply a big central number 9 who runs in behind goes, and that's exactly the type of profile they bring in. So yeah, I think if he did go, it would make it very likely that they bring not only the one left winger who they know they need, but another one to add to that forward line. But I'm not sure, given they've got Quistgaarden and Cianats, who can both play in that number 9 position, and they are quite keen not to oversaturate it and create a situation where you've got players like, for example, Adam Eder, who aren't getting a game and are ultimately unhappy with their roles. I could see it being a more general frontline addition, more likely in the wide areas than a sort of typical number 9 in that central role.
Yeah, one question just around maybe the fee that Norwich could command, I suppose, for Josh Sargent. Why do you think there's such a disparity in the fee reported in Germany compared to the fee we as fans expect him to go for? I think the report maybe in Germany was suggesting around 13 million euros off the top of my head, which I think inevitably, Colin, he's not going to be departing for that kind of money.
No, he isn't. I think it'll have to be closer to 20. I mean, again, this is stuff we've reported now for a couple of weeks, but I think the conversation probably starts around 16, and that's where you then begin to really be able to hone in on on various stuff. But I think you'd be looking at a package very close, if not over 20 million, I think, for him. And that's twofold, really, from my perspective. I think it's clearly the international aspect. He hasn't scored a goal for USA for 5 years. That will be an area that people look at, rightly or wrongly, and say that that's high-level competition. They'll use that to maybe translate how he could perform. And look, I think a lot of that is quite harsh because there's been luck and there's been various different aspects to that USA form. He missed a large chunk of that for out of injury. So, yeah, I think that's one. And then clearly the other is the injuries one, which is going to be difficult if you've got a player who, as good as Josh Sargent is at championship level, those injuries have kept him out for significant periods of time, and those period of times are costly, particularly if you're let's say I'm a sporting director and I'm presenting to an owner. I'm saying, look, I've got this really good striker. He's American. He's 25. He's scored loads of goals in the second tier. He's only fit 30 games a season, but ignore that. Then, clearly that is going to be slightly problematic. So ultimately the market dictates that. And I think this idea of maybe, Josh Sargent wanting to stay, of course, you have to take in mind what he wants as well. And I'm sure at this stage of his career, of his life, he probably would prefer to go and challenge himself elsewhere. I personally feel that of the two clubs being mentioned, and as we said, there might be others, and there are definitely others that are interested, but there might be others that come to the table as these two are. I think Wolfsburg is probably a better move for him. It is closer to where he was based in Bremen. Clearly his family were quite comfortable there before Norwich, and I think the Bundesliga probably feels like a better fit, sort of an easier schedule, more opportunity for him to really catch fire and really push on, and that elevates you to a different level of Premier League club if the Premier League is your ultimate ambition. And that's not to say it is for Josh Sargent. So ultimately the market dictates what he's worth. The bids that come in dictate what he's worth, and then it's up to Norwich to try and squeeze as much out of that as is humanly possible. So you combine all of those. I think Sam's been quite optimistic with 15%, to be honest. I'm probably somewhere closer to 5 at this stage, but we all hope he stays and want him to stay because Norwich City are a much better team with him in it. But it does feel to me, and I've said this all the way throughout the summer, that this probably, for the player, feels like the best opportunity now to go and kick on and search for a new challenge. And I think what I would add alongside the international performance, probably the Premier League stuff as well beforehand, which is harsh because he was such a young man. He was playing out of position. He was behind Teemu Pukki. But some of that comes into the thinking, and that sort of explains why maybe the level of number being spoken about at the moment is different to maybe what fans' expectations were. But I think if you're Norwich, you're still hopeful that even if it's a package, you can get it over the £20 million line.
Yes, indeed. Let's talk incomings, because there's been a few more rumours, I suppose, surfacing this week, add on top of the ones that we've spoken around maybe over the last couple of weeks of individuals that Norwich are interested in. Let's start with one that maybe has been a target for them over the course of the summer, one they've watched, but not currently one they're actively pursuing. That is Yang at Celtic. He's a 23-year-old winger. Done pretty well off the bench, predominantly for Celtic last year. Sam, where are we at with that one? Probably unlikely to arrive at Colney this summer.
Yeah, I think when there's a player they've watched and they like, I would never say definitely. Obviously, there could be a scenario where Diallo doesn't work out, for example, and a couple of other targets don't work out for them, and maybe they're going back to the drawing board and looking at players who they've watched previously. But right now, there's certainly nothing active trying to get that deal over the line. Clearly, with Diallo and a couple of the other players we've highlighted, there are more active options and options that probably they've looked at and decided are better than Yang. I think you look at maybe what he's done over the last couple of years with Celtic, and he probably wouldn't be coming in and being a sort of starting caliber player for a side that wants to get promoted out of the Championship. So I think, although I wouldn't want to say definitely, because we've all seen how much the market can change and how events can shape things over the course of a transfer window. Certainly right now, he's behind all of those other names that we've mentioned, and there is no active work from Ben Napper or any of his recruitment staff to try to get that deal over the line, or even really to explore what might be included in it. So yeah, I think the names probably come from quite exploratory scouting that they've done of him. He's clearly somebody they're aware of, but equally they do that with so many players over the course of a season and going into a transfer window. And yeah, right now you probably wouldn't put him in that bracket to sort of keep an eye on. So yeah, if it does change, then it will be in a while, I'd say, and a few things will have had to have gone wrong for Norwich for that to happen. And you look at how well they've been able to execute this summer, to use the word that Mark Attanasio did quite often in our chat and in the fan forum as it related to transfers. And you'd be surprised if enough things went wrong for them then to be turning to Yang as somebody who they watched earlier on in the window and aren't active on signing. So it's bad news for fans of Yang. But clearly they've got other options that they're pursuing, and probably Diallo is chief among them in that wide area where they know they have to add. I think it's also worth saying he played mostly on the right. As I spoke about earlier, they do see those attacking options as sort of more of a fluid department than simply nailing someone down to each position. But clearly that's where he feels most comfortable and where he's played most of his football. And given the left is very much the priority at the moment, with Borja Sainz gone and Quistgarden likelier to be needed through the middle, with Josh Sargent likely to move on, I'd be surprised. And certainly right now, not one they're moving on.
Yes, I mentioned there a couple of times, Connor Diallo, the Senegalese winger who Norwich have reportedly, been interested in. No club-to-club agreement at this point, but clearly one that they like and are sort of trying to do behind the scenes. Watford, he had a medical there, and that deal's still not progressed any further. I know they've sort of brought in a couple of additions in their wide areas in recent weeks, or certainly moving towards a conclusion on those. So where are we at with that deal? Is he one that maybe we can still, I suppose, expect to keep tabs on over the course of the rest of this summer?
Yeah, definitely. I think probably again, no, and maybe this will be a theme throughout the show, but yeah, no real sort of major update on that. Norwich is still trying; they're still interested, and again, as I sort of said, if not last week, the week before, it all merges into one. I think if Norwich weren't being given encouragement by his representatives, by Mattsson, and maybe they weren't at a level where that deal was possible, I think this would be over by now, to be honest. The fact that they're still in the hunt, still pursuing him is probably evidence enough that they believe they can get the deal done. Now, obviously, you mentioned there's been some other reports elsewhere. To be honest, it's a struggle to keep up with Norwich's ESC situation, bear in mind anyone else, but certainly from what you read from a Watford perspective, they are a little bit tight with some of their slots, which is why I think the Danish striker that they signed very cleverly and definitely legally went to Udinese and then went on loan to Watford, clearly because they're sort of part of this multi-club ownership with Udinese through the Pozzo family. They're able to do that, and that helps them kind of bypass those sort of situations. But essentially, for them, they might have to wait another month before he's eligible to be signed as a kind of GBE option. And we'll probably speak more around this Mattsson later. And I got told off last week because I wasn't specific enough. So GBE, just to be absolutely clear, because it is quite complicated. So this is a governing body endorsement. So that is essentially a work permit. So a player that achieves 15 points, and they achieve that through lots of different ways, but primarily the level of football they're playing at currently, international level, and also it can be like youth level and things like that, different kind of levels, European competitions and whatnot. So Diallo playing in Ligue 2 last season, that is not considered, or he doesn't get enough points despite being a Senegalese international to qualify for one of those. So that essentially means if a club wanted to sign him, they'd have to use one of their ESC slots, which stands for Elite Significant Contribution. So that is essentially, and this is all because of Brexit, essentially, but that means that clubs are given as many as 4 slots, depending on the percentage of English. Are you still with me? On the percentage of English minutes they had the year before. So that can be anywhere from 2 to 4, depending on the percentage of English minutes. Norwich are quite tight, but they do have 4. Watford, again, without really checking, I don't know, but the reports suggest, I think, 3, and they've got maybe 2 or 3 in those slots already. But that essentially is 4 slots that allows clubs. The best way I sort of think of it is they can sign players from anywhere, and they're able to do so using some of those slots, but clearly they're quite precious because there's a limited amount of them. Hopefully that will make sense and isn't complete gibberish. So the situation with Watford is, as soon as he steps foot in Ligue 1, which Metz got promoted, and that will happen next month when the season kicks off, he would then be eligible for a GBE, which would then obviously enable Watford to sign him without having to dedicate an ESC slot for him. Makes it easier. With Norwich, that isn't the case. So they could theoretically sign Diallo, give him an ESC slot, and that would short-circuit the process. They could get him in a lot quicker. From what we understand and from our calculations, and these things aren't released publicly, so it is to an extent a bit of educated guesswork. Norwich have 4 slots available this season. They were very, very tight on that, by the way, but they do qualify for 4 from kind of my working out. Mate Jurasek is one, clearly from the January saga that we covered and spoke about then. The other one is Amankwa Forson, who didn't get enough minutes last season to convert that into a GBE. So not to add to the confusion, but essentially there are 2 windows every year where you can convert ESC slots into GBE slots based on minutes played in the championship, other factors, international rankings, etc., can play a part. So Jose Cordoba, Oscar Schwartau, who also came in on them ESC slots, are also now GBE slots. So Norwich got 2 spare. That's basically a long-winded way of saying that. And that probably means that Norwich have a window here where not particularly under pressure to get it done all in the space of a week, which is why I think they've been able maybe to haggle a little bit more with Metz over the fee and the structure of the payments and whatnot, and to get that a little bit more favourable to themselves, is that they know that Watford are working to a different deadline. So they can maybe work at a slightly lesser pace than they did with Matthias Christgoren, for example. So that is hopefully that all made sense and it wasn't just complete jargon, but that is essentially the situation as I kind of see it at the moment. And Norwich, obviously, if they can then get that agreement with Metz, if they then can convince Diallo, and I don't think it would take much convincing. I think the soundings they've had from him have been pretty positive all the way through, irrespective of maybe how advanced that Watford deal is. Then essentially they could get him in at an earlier point than Watford could. Again, without a full understanding of Watford's ESC situation, but based off what's been reported on theirs. So that's kind of where we're at. And it means that Norwich have a bit more time to play with over this one, I think. Hopefully, Adam, that all made sense and wasn't too confusing, because I've given myself a headache trying to explain it.
Yeah, I think I'll sleep well later after all of that information. Let's now get into the midfielders and where we're at on that hunt. There was a new name pushed into the frame during the course of this week. Topic, a midfielder who's 6'3", Serbian international, played over in Portugal now for a couple of seasons. Big lad, defensive midfielder. Of course, he got the question here from Finley around maybe the two. Let's ask you first about Topic, Sam. Where are we at, and where's kind of Norwich's interest in him? Is he one that Norwich are currently pursuing?
Definitely one they like and are looking at, but I don't think there's been, or certainly the last information we had was that there hadn't been any club-to-club approach. There haven't been discussions over a potential fee for him or a deal being done, but certainly they view him as quite a forefront option in the few options that they have for that midfield position. Obviously, the Mattsson situation, which we'll come on to, is more advanced, and that is at a club-to-club stage. But Topic is definitely one who they like. They feel he fits the profile and would work for them in that midfield slot. But I think right now I see it probably more as a sort of backup in case Mattsson continues to show no progress on that deal. Obviously, it's been deadlocked for a little while. And when that's the case, Ben Napper has to consider other options, because as good as they've been at getting those deals over the line and attracting people to sign for Norwich and probably agreeing fees that they would see as very favourable to them, not everything is going to go your way in a transfer window. And I think when that's the case, you have to consider potential other options. So personally, when you look at how much work they've done for Mattsson, the stage that's at compared to the stage it's at with Topic, it does feel like if they could choose one or the other, then they probably would choose Mattsson. But certainly if they had Topic in the team next season, what we're led to believe is that they wouldn't be disappointed by that, and they certainly see him as someone who fits that profile that they're looking for this summer. But right now, as I said, no club-to-club discussions, no offers from Norwich. I think the reports from Portugal suggested that they were sort of braced for an offer in the coming days, but that offer hasn't been received yet, and Norwich are still considering him rather than sort of moving on it and trying to make that deal happen as they have been with Mattsson. So probably one to keep an eye on, and certainly one they like, but I'd say more likely an option if they don't get any progress on this Mattsson deal before long, and they have to consider who else they maybe turn to in that midfield position, which we obviously know is a priority for them this summer. I think people have looked at that profile and said that he's the sort of defensive midfielder that probably they've been wanting since Alexander Tettey and Oliver Skipp left the club in 2021. But yeah, that would probably depend on a Mattsson deal being unlikely or there being no progress and Napper deciding that it was time to maybe move on other options.
Yeah, Pelle Mattson, as sort of Sam's outlined there, Connor, clearly, someone that Norwich would like to try and bring to the football club this summer. He's sort of been in and around Silkboard's pre-season. One game I don't think he featured, and then after one of the others, he was kind of speaking a little bit about his future. Just the main headline quote was, "I don't want to get into all the talk about clubs, then my head will work overtime, but I've said that England would be great." I know Nuremberg have sort of come into the frame supposedly in recent days as well. So where's your head at, I suppose, in that deal and maybe him becoming a potential Norwich City player?
Yeah, well, Norwich have done a lot of work on him. I think that's probably the first point to say in terms of the profiling. I mean, Mark Attanasio spoke a bit about the length and depth that they go into, and I think he was one that they've identified from a pretty early stage at this summer as one that could fill that position and suit what they're trying to do. So he's a really interesting one, and again, a footnote on him: he would be an ESC slot until, and this is the most interesting point, until this week, actually, whereby he is set to play as it stands in Silkeborg's Europa Conference League second round qualifying game, leg 1 of 2 against Icelandic team. I'm not going to pronounce it, but we'll just say KA. But they've also got the Superliga opening as well on Sunday. So I think if you're Silkeborg, you'd probably want Pelle Mattson for both of those games. And this, I think, probably explains where their stance is at, where it feels to me like they are maybe trying to dig their heels in a bit. I think, Adam, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think he's got 12 months left on his deal as well. So that adds an interesting kind of, as Norwich had with Sainz, a time limiting factor on it, where you have to kind of balance the risk of maybe letting that run further down with trying to get the best possible fee for him. There are reports in Denmark today and sort of in our local media that it's €3 million that they want for him. I think the Norwich bid was 175 million in pounds. I'm not sure of the conversion rates, but that's still a bit of a way off between the clubs. And I think Silkeborg are very aware of what Norwich are willing to go to. And now it's about maybe trying to find a compromise within that. You get the sense, certainly from those quotes and certainly from all of the stuff that kind of we've said previously, that the player would be quite interested. And of course, I think it's probably in Silkeborg's interest and maybe in the players' interest to get more interest out there, to try and get people to come to the table. These are all the kind of things that run parallel to a transfer window, is kind of the smoke screens and the stuff to try and get people to move. So I think Holsten Kiel as well, someone mentioned to me potentially as one that liked him. So I think there probably is German interest, but that doesn't feel like it's moved at all, and I don't think it will until or unless Silkeborg decide to maybe come back and have a chat with Norwich about trying to compromise where the numbers currently are. But it doesn't feel like they're a million miles off, you would hope, and there was certainly as late as the week before last real confidence that they could make that happen. And yeah, considering the work that's been done on him, it would be quite surprising to me if Norwich suddenly pulled away. I think they like the player likes them, and so it's about trying to then get a deal done, which, as Ben Napper said on Tuesday, is the difficult bit, because you can identify players and you can target them and you can speak to clubs, but it's actually getting the deal over the line. That's the challenging bit. And obviously Norwich have done that so well in the first part of the window that I think this lull has maybe been quite disconcerting all round, given the pace of their business. But yeah, it's going to be a big week for Pelle Mattson. Certainly reading around, they play St. Pauli in a friendly. When would it have been? Weekend, maybe, I think, which is probably before those quotes came out, and certainly suggested that maybe he was playing like a player that had his kind of, not head turned, but maybe was a little bit distracted by the speculation. So if that persists into their Superliga opener and the Conference League qualifier, then I think they'll probably want that resolved pretty quickly. So yeah, this feels to me like it could be a pretty big week for that. Might not end up not being, and it could rumble on, but I think either way, it feels like Norwich probably need to either get something moving or perhaps, as Sam said earlier, move on to Topic or other midfield options of which they have if that doesn't move. So that feels to me like it's probably approaching a pretty critical stage, I would say, and maybe on the Diallo stuff similarly, but again, equally, I think because of the Watford window, that probably affords Norwich slightly more time on that one compared to maybe Pelle Mattson, particularly if that interest is tangible. Portsmouth have also been linked. It sounds like they're now pretty close to signing a Hungarian midfielder whose name I recognise. So I think he must have been linked with Norwich at one point in time, because I don't watch Hungarian football. So that maybe feels like some of the interest potentially is now going to come from Germany rather than perhaps elsewhere in the Championship on him. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
We will. This time last week, we were sort of speaking about left backs and maybe the interest in Aaron Creswell. I've seen a few people asking around the left backs. Northern Canary saying any rumours on a left back coming in. Finley saying thought the chat with Mark was interesting. He mentioned left back, so I wonder what the situation is. Liam Manning, sort of post Northampton, sort of cleared up that Mahovo's still having fitness problems. Krezene is sort of still working his way back to fitness, and clearly that's an area that Norwich are assessing. They think there's options within the group as well, so it's still an area that's sort of open, I suppose, for interest. Charlie Taylor, maybe one from Southampton that we sort of put out there this week as one Norwich might be monitoring. What's kind of the latest, I suppose, on that slot, Sam, and that position?
Yeah, well, I think Manning sort of spoke about it as something they were going to monitor. I think we've been saying for a couple of weeks that a lot of the positions from this point forward will be decided by how pre-season unfolds, and sort of they'll be guided by events to an extent. But certainly, if they've spoken to Aaron Creswell and tried to get that deal done, then as you said, we've had it out there that they've been looking at Charlie Taylor. Clearly, a lot of that work has been done, and it is a very real possibility if they've looked at multiple players and discussed multiple deals. So I would say there is a good chance they do bring in that slightly more experienced left back, but clearly, as Manning said after that Northampton game, they don't want to block the pathways of Ben Krezene and Lucian Mahovo. They see them both as strong talents, and that was probably the feeling that you got when you discussed the position early on in the summer. Of course, there were those links with Harry Toffolo when it looked like, and obviously subsequently he has now left Nottingham Forest. They were very happy with the left back department, but clearly as the weeks go on and the injury problems persist, Lucian Mahovo not expected to be back in training for a little while. Ben Krezene obviously didn't play in that Northampton friendly. It does feel more and more likely that you do a deal for that. But obviously the fact that they rate those two players so highly means they don't want to sign anyone on a 3-4 year contract where then Krezene and Mahovo are going to either have to sit on the bench for years, or they're going to have to consider a loan move away, which Norwich don't really feel they need to do. So I think it will be probably a 12-month deal if they do bring someone in. It remains something that they're considering, but as Manning said, it probably will be shaped by events. If there's some miraculous recovery by Mahovo and he's back in training 2 weeks before the start of the season, then maybe there's room to reconsider. But what I would say is if they've done that much legwork, they've had those serious discussions with and about players about potentially signing for Norwich, then it is a very distinct and very real possibility. So if I had to guess now, based purely on opinion and educated guessing, putting those factors together, I'd say they probably will move in that area. But equally, as I said, if events change, they do rate those two left backs highly enough that if they were both fit and they had confidence that they would be able to play for the majority of the season, they're very comfortable that that's a department good enough to help them get promoted, which ultimately is obviously the goal for next season. So it will be one to sort of watch, but clearly one they've done a lot of work on, and it'll be interesting to see which direction they go in.
Yes, indeed. We'll definitely do a few of these comments for sort of the last 15 or 20 minutes or so. Kieran saying, afternoon, lads. I saw a rumour come up on Twitter from the Turkish media linking us to another centre-back last night. I'm assuming there's nothing in that, right? I think it's Tala, the Besiktas centre-back, who, given that Norwich have got quite a stock of centre-backs at the moment, I don't think that's one that Norwich is going to be moving on this summer, Connor.
Correct.
There we go. That answers that one nice and quickly. Andy saying Borja has a reported €100 million release clause. How does this actually work? Realistically, no one is going to pay that for him. I think that's pretty common, though, isn't it, in Spain and Portugal, Connor, that most of these players, typically have that release clause.
Yes, correct. I think. Yeah, Portugal, Spain. I'm sure there are some other places as well. It's mandatory. They have to put them in the contract. So that will be one that Porto have just stuck in there. I think Kovacevic had one as well during his time at Sporting that was pretty high. So yeah, I wouldn't read into that. It's certainly not a Morgan Gibbs-White situation where one has or maybe hasn't been inserted into his contract. I'll protect myself there, allegedly. So I think it's one that has to be in. And of course, if it has to be in, then you whack it way higher than you think is realistic, because if someone pays it, that means the player has done exceptionally well. But otherwise, it probably just gives you a little bit more license to negotiate a better fee for him. So yeah, I wouldn't read too much into that. It's just something that is the case in and the way of the world over there. It's good on Football Manager, though, because it means you can get usually quite a few younger players for quite cheap if anyone plays. So there's a nice tip for you.
There we go, insider information there for Connor, for anybody interested. A lot of people mentioning around Nunes in the comments. Finley saying, could Nunes stay and be at number 10 if we play 4-2-3-1? Very quiet regarding Marcelino. There's a question from my guy Despo. Do you think at this stage, if Nunes doesn't sign an extension, Norwich would take getting the money back for him, €3.9 million with 1 year left on his contract? And Richard saying, what percentage do we have on Nunes if Sarge is between 5 and 15% of staying? So sort of in order there, Sam, Nunes' position, I suppose, in a system, would Norwich take the money back, and what percentage chances does he have of staying?
Yeah, the position is a really interesting one, because I think Norwich have a few players, and we've spoken about this before, where they're midfielders, and obviously that department is extremely well stocked, a bit like centre back, but they do feel quite like sort of 4-3-3 number 8. So I'm not sure Nunes has the physical capabilities, certainly in terms of the actual strength. Obviously, we've all seen that he can run all day long, but in terms of winning those meaty challenges, I don't know if he's the perfect midfielder for a sort of a 2 in a 4-2-3-1. And then in terms of number 10, although he does feel like that kind of player, he's quite technically good. He's got that low centre of gravity. I'm not sure. I think he thrives a bit more with a bit more time on the ball, and maybe having the game sort of in front of him. We've seen those raking passes, those diagonal balls that he can play, and have been really effective for Norwich at various times since he joined the club back in 2022. And I'm not sure I really see him as that sort of number 10 who maybe can be right next to a striker, sometimes running in behind when the striker drops a little bit deeper and provides that slightly more attacking option. I do see him more as a number 8 and a bit of a dictator of play. So I think for Manning, he certainly has a player there. And given Norwich want to be proactive, they want to control games, maybe not to the same religious possession-based nature that it was under Johannes Hoff-Torp, but they do want to be an attacking team. And I think when you consider that, Manning has a really good player on his hands. But in terms of the systems that he's played elsewhere, obviously a 4-2-3-1, as referenced by Finley in that question, for a lot of his career, a 3-4-3 with Bristol City last season, I'm not sure Nunes really fits either of those perfectly. So either you just say, okay, that's fine, he's not a perfect central midfielder in a 2, but he's a 7 out of 10, and that's good enough as a squad option, then maybe you just do that. But I think if they want to make him a central plank of their system, then maybe Manning changes it a little bit. In terms of what was the next question, would they take what they paid for him? I suppose, well, without knowing for sure, that's just a matter of my opinion, but I think with 12 months left on the deal, he is a good player, but I'm not sure they see him as irreplaceable. So I wouldn't be shocked. Maybe that would be 3.2 or 3 million pounds. And I don't think that would be a dreadful deal for them at this stage of his career, and at this stage, of course, of his contract. We know that, as I mentioned, he maybe wouldn't perfectly fit a Manning system and isn't the prototype of a Manning central midfielder. When you look at those players like Max Bird, Jason Knight, much bigger, more physical, maybe slightly more defensive players in that area as well. So personally, I don't think that would be a terrible deal for them, although I think that would be somewhere around the border of, when you consider Norwich's finances at this moment in time. If somebody just offered a couple of million, would it be worth just keeping him for a year? I don't think they would completely rule that possibility out. So yeah, I could see that maybe being around the mark it would cost to take him away from Norwich at this stage. And then percentage-wise, it's a tough one, because I think we were expecting more interest going into the window, but everything you hear suggests that there just hasn't been. It's been basically completely quiet on him so far, as opposed to what it's been with obviously Borja Sainz before he left, with Josh Sargent over the last few weeks, and in fact with Nunes going back a few summers. There were links with obviously Brighton, Everton. There was strong interest from Trabzonspor. That was probably as close as anyone's come to signing him from Norwich. But there just hasn't been that interest. So it's hard now, without any evidence of any club being interested in Nunes, to say that he's likely to leave. But when you consider the contractual element, the number of midfielders they've got, the fact they want to add another one, as we've already spoken about today, it feels like there's probably at least a 30 or 40% chance of him going. So maybe I'll go 60% he stays and 40% he leaves at this stage. But obviously plenty of time left in the window, and that interest might develop later. But right now, given there have been no clubs in contact with Norwich about Nunes, it's hard to say that it's any likelier than that he leaves at this stage.
Yes, while we're on the theme of midfielders, Max on X saying any noises on which midfielder players maybe moved on this summer now that Manning has a chance to look at them. I suppose there's a few obvious candidates within maybe the players in the playing squad at the moment, but there hasn't really been much noise, certainly externally, on that.
No, not beyond that Emmy Marcon. There's Brazil week we had. That's all gone quiet as well now. So, no, all pretty quiet, to be honest. I'm quite intrigued by Nunes, as Sam says. What the one point I would make around the number 10 is I think you look at the way Liam Manning has played typically, and it's been about applying lots of pressure high up the pitch and being really intense. And Nunes is a player that covers a lot of ground and does that at a pretty intense rate, to his own detriment sometimes, because I think it's the reason that he's picked up injuries. And maybe, and I think Johannes Torp spoke about this, a need to kind of manage that either with himself or how they sort of train him. So, but you look at that, if Norwich want to be on the front foot from a pressing perspective, then I think Nunes as a 10, you could do a lot worse than that. Although I would agree with Sam, I think he's better in a deeper position with a game in front of him where he can kind of set and dictate the tempo a little bit. So, and for me as well with Nunes, I just don't really see where he goes, what the market is for him, where he would end up, particularly if, let's say he's got his eyes on the Premier League, which a lot of players do, then that makes things extremely difficult if he doesn't want to go anywhere else. So, that's an interesting one. I think Anis Ben Slimani interests me as well. Clearly one of the Dutch contingent that Johannes Torp brought to the club last season. It's difficult to know where he fits. Is he a number 10? Is he a more of an 8? We saw his form drop off slightly. I think there were good bits. I think with a solid pre-season, he didn't have that last season as well. So probably no real surprise that he maybe ran out of steam a little bit. Liam Gibbs as well, I think is an interesting one because he needs to play football. So if that permanent interest isn't there, do you try and get him out on loan if he's not going to be a part of it? But clearly he's someone who certainly trains very well from the people I speak to, and that is probably why he managed to push through into Johannes Torp's team last season. So there's so much around those midfield positions. But I think like centre-back, really, what they can't do, Sam mentioned it, they want to add another on top. They're going to have to thin that department out by the time this transfer window ends. And likewise, centre-backs as well. You just cannot carry that bigger squad. Forson, again, interesting. Where does he fit? I think there are so many questions to be answered, and that's a very good point that Finley makes on Schwartau as well. That was really interesting. I don't know how that's assessed or what it's measured using, but I think Torp actually, now I think about it, spoke about his pressing and his ability kind of off the ball a little bit. So you could certainly see a world in where that really appeals to Liam Manning. So yeah, I think as Sam said earlier, pre-season probably holds the keys to that. It's going to be really interesting to see the games tomorrow and next Friday and kind of see where that where those are kind of where Liam Manning's head is at as that thins out towards NAC Breda and the Champions League. Did I say Anis Ben Slimani is Dutch? I didn't mean Dutch, I meant Danish. I've got Dutch in my head clearly. So yeah, sorry. He's not even Danish, he's Tunisian, but he was part of the Danish contingent. Very I've confused myself enough with GBEs and ESCs. It's all going downhill.
Yeah, moving on. Richard Brookman saying, did you boys find out why Eurosec only played 28 minutes? I think it was just managing minutes more than anything, Richard. Yeah, obviously one that's had an injury and various other problems, and they're just kind of trying to ease him back in easily and quickly. Twitchy Terry saying, cousin saw Diallo having a pint and a curry in the Iceni. Can you confirm he's en route? I think he might have had mistaken identity there, Twitchy Terry. Not one that's actively in Norwich at the moment. Over Mitten on X saying, is there any news around Long and Reyes? All pretty quiet still on the goalkeeper front though, Sam, in terms of exits.
I've not heard anything about any potential interest, and I think those two strike me as probably a couple where things will move around later in the window. I think I can see a situation where maybe a League One or a League Two club has a loan from a Premier League club and they have someone get injured and they have to call someone back, and then it opens a situation where they're sort of scrambling for maybe Championship goalkeepers they can get on loan. Unfortunately, you look at the form of particularly Long last season, but maybe Reyes as well to an extent, and I don't see many clubs who have got them at the top of their lists. I think that's probably one where once they've either worked through a couple of options or they've had an injury or something like that, then that's probably when the change happens. I think both of them, as has probably been clear ever since they started that sort of goalkeeping reshuffle this summer, Norwich are very, very open to exits for them, whether that's on loan or permanently. And it's just a case of wait and see. Obviously, they'll be well aware of their positions as well. And although they'd rather have a contract at Norwich than no contract whatsoever, they're obviously, every footballer wants to play football, and I'm sure they're very aware of their situations and will be doing work to see if there's any clubs who could move for them at this stage. But as I said, I think I see that more as one where if people can't get their first choice goalkeepers or events happen that change the situations, then maybe they'll be coming to a club like Norwich and saying, have you got any goalkeepers we can take on loan or take off your hands? And that's probably a likelier situation to see those two depart.
Yes, let's tip into a few more of these. Charlie's saying, is Miles injured? Wasn't involved in the Northampton friendly? Any sort of, I suppose, noises or anything you've heard around him, Connor?
I think he was with Wales, wasn't he? The youth team. So I'd imagine he was one of these that maybe got a bit of an extended break, but I don't know that for sure. Obviously, maybe that's one we can bowl at Liam Manning tomorrow after the two games. But I think I've seen him pictured in Netherlands, but I might be wrong on that. I might have made it up. But so my expectation probably would be that he's joined up a little bit later and maybe will be involved from here.
On ESC's Faith asking, did Chris Gordon take up an ESC slot? I don't believe he did.
No, he did. No, he didn't. Very, very tight. So I'm not quite sure how. I think he might have been one that was just on the border. So sometimes, again, without making this really complicated, you can go to an exceptions panel and get one pushed through, maybe of a player that's got a very high pedigree. So they could have gone down that route, but no, he's on a GBE. So yeah, he's not one of the two. The two that are taken up. So they're taking up 2 of the 4. Jurasek and Forsen, from what we can kind of work out. Again, this isn't publicly available, probably should be publicly available in my opinion, but there you go. That's kind of the situation with him. So no, he doesn't.
Yeah, a couple more questions around Sargent. One saying, do you think the success of Sarge that we'd be more inclined to explore the American market, I suppose, for players in the future, given our own and potential marketing opportunities? And that probably ties in a little bit with Christopher's question around, do you think Derby signing Adjaman will have any impact on Sargent, given there'll be a direct comparison for the US men's national team if both are in the championship? But I think, as we kind of outlined at the top of the show, we expect Sargent probably more than likely to depart this summer.
Yeah, I think as far as the American market, it's definitely one that championship clubs have been moving towards more. Obviously, there's that Adjaman deal that Christopher mentions. I think Middlesbrough have done quite a lot of good work in that market as well. Aidan Morris is one who I think Norwich actually watched, and a few of their ex-scouts had an eye on for a while as well before he moved there. So certainly it's a market that a lot of championship clubs are looking at. Obviously, with Sargent, there was that jump in between because he was at Werder Bremen for a few years, and actually that was mainly sort of where he came through as a player, was in Germany. So I don't know if that was a sort of example that you can go off, but certainly I think what clubs who want to try to save money primarily and also to jump ahead of other clubs have to do is look at taking out the sort of the middleman. You see so many players who will be in the Championship or in other smaller leagues. They then go to the Premier League and they play at the bottom of the Premier League, and that's when bigger clubs will pick them up. So I think clubs like Norwich have to be looking at where are these players coming from, and can they almost skip a step in their career and get them when their value's a little bit lower, rather than waiting for them to prove themselves in the Championship or in a more well-known league before moving for them. So I think in a logistical sense or in an ideas sense, it would make more sense to move into the MLS. But obviously right now it's not an area where they've looked at too much. We haven't seen, I can't remember the last time they did any business from that area, I think in my head, but there must be someone since then. But certainly it's been, or Reyes actually did come from there, didn't he? But in terms of first team, it's not somewhere they've done too much work in. So probably their scouting departments would have to change a little bit. You look at the work they've done in South America, and that has taken a lot of infrastructure, a lot of work, and they've had to have staff out there for a long period of time. So it would probably be quite a lot of effort to pivot so hard in that direction. But certainly it's an area that you've seen other championship clubs work in, and it's a league that's probably getting better. So that would make sense. In terms of Adjaman and his move and how that affects Sargent, I'm not sure that would really lend itself to a change in the situation. Obviously, the national team is a part of things for Sargent, but It's not the only part of it, and I think there is that personal ambition as well. He's getting to an age now where if he doesn't make the jump to a big league, he probably doesn't ever take off to a real top level that obviously every footballer wants to be at. So I don't really see that changing things for him at all, to be honest.
Yeah, a lot of questions are around pre-season, but just before we talk about them, a few people asking maybe our predictions for a first day starting 11, leaving gaps away. You think they'll be filled by a new signing? I also saw Bish say, quick question, if we start the season with a back three, who do you think starts in a back three? So I suppose it depends on what formation you lads are going to start. So Connor, I'll come to you first. If you sort of, I suppose, pick a 11 on the spot for that opening game against Millwall, who would be in it?
Oh, okay. Yeah, you have put me on the spot here a bit. I'll go 4-2-3-1. Kovacevic, which is how we're told it's said, by the way. So I better raise the hat to Paddy. You got that right on the podcast when we were all wrong on it. Right back, I think will be Jack Stacey. I think it will be Jakov Medic. I think it will be Harry Darling. I'm going to go new left back and go interesting. I think they might do a left back. Jacob Wright, new midfielder. Jurasek. Oh, who's going to play 10? That's a good question. I'll go Schwartau out of the box. New left winger, Chris Goran, I think is how I'm going to go. Or I think if you want to mix it up and do the front two slightly differently, you could go Chris Goran behind Sienats, which I think could also be quite exciting. So that's kind of where my head is at, I think, for the opening day.
So how many gaps you'd fill or change there?
I think Connor's probably right. I think personally, with that front two, I'd go Sienats behind Chris Garden. Having never watched Chris Garden ever play a full game before, I've decided that he's going to be the number 9 that runs in behind. But I think watching when Sienats was at his best last season, that was mostly for me him drifting into that sort of number 10 position from the right and having someone running in front of him, either having the option of a pass or a shot from distance. I think that's probably when he's at his best, but we'll see how Manning goes for that. I think midfield maybe is another area I'd change. That's probably the only other thing. I could see him going to start off with Kenny McLean in there. I think although they will want to improve on anyone they've currently got in the transfer market, and you look at the development that Manning will hope for from his players, there probably are a few who could end up being quite a lot better than McLean by the end of the season. But right now, definitely he's going to give you a 7 out of 10. He's the club captain. He's got that championship experience. And I think for a first competitive game for a head coach, someone who knows the championship, it probably makes sense for quite a solid midfield duo of him and Jacob Wright, where you sort of know what you're going to get. But apart from that, I think I'd probably agree. The left back situation is an interesting one. But yeah, I think Connor's probably right with the rest of them.
Yeah, I think I'd go with majority of that. I'd like to see Forson in the 10. I don't know. As much as, there's sort of been a few, even that, the mistake for the goal the other day, but, certainly a player that I think I saw enough of in that Cardiff game, at the final day of the season to believe that there's something there. A few people just asking around maybe the format of how the games are going to be over the course of the next couple of days. OJ saying, do you know what the plan is with the double-header matches? Is it going to be 2 completely different squads, or are they going to be mixed, being played in the same stadium? And that probably links slightly to Killian's question around, do you think we'll see Manning's likely first 11 play together in any of the Dutch matches, or will it all be mixed up? So sort of in terms of the format and how Norwich approach it, any sort of insight on that, Connor?
I don't know is the honest answer. I think if I was going to have to guess, I'd go 2 separate 11s and then try and get a lot of minutes with probably the young lads split and kind of supplementing that to fill in the gaps where they need to be filled. If you watch, the club put a video out this morning around the club's camp, and Manning spoke in that around getting next Friday, hopefully a lot of 90 minutes into those players' legs. So I think we'll probably see an hour maybe of a lot of the same players. Maybe some players will be pushed on slightly more than that. But for all the reasons we've mapped out, they've got 6 centre-backs, 6 goalkeepers, 9 midfielders. They're not going to be short of players to fill both of those teams were. As for the stadium one, no, they're in different stadiums. I mean, tomorrow they're in different countries, which presents quite the logistical challenge for us, Adam, as we try and dart across from, a midday kickoff to a 7 o'clock kickoff in Belgium. We've got about an hour and just short of 2 hours to get between the two, so that's going to be quite interesting. If there's any sort of hold up, then we might miss kickoff, but hopefully that's not the case. So and then next Friday similarly, but I think the games are a bit closer, aren't they, Adam, from what we gather? So Olympiacos they're playing them a bit closer to where they're then playing Den Haag. So next Friday logistically is a little bit easier from us based on where we're based, but tomorrow I think is going to be quite a long day. So yeah, I think it will be mixed, and with some young lads probably supplemented in. As ever, you can read as much or as little as you like into anything that happens over the next week or so in terms of the players that are played, where they're played, the formations in which they're played. But actually, I think it will be that NAC Breda game, a couple of weeks now at Carrow Road, that will maybe tell us a lot more about what is in Liam Manning's head ahead of that championship opener.
Yeah, last couple of questions. Finney saying, was Fisher injured in the friendly or still cautious after his injury at the back end of last season? I think he did come off with a slight knock, didn't he, Sam?
Yeah, but from what we've seen of the training stuff in terms of the videos and stuff that they've put out, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure he's been in there with everyone else. So yeah, that's probably part and parcel of pre-season, but nothing really to worry about as it goes forward.
Yeah, I was just to add to that, I was told it was precautionary, just sort of felt his hamstring a little bit, and obviously at that stage of pre-season, if that's the case, you whip them off and you don't risk it, as was the case with a lot of those players. Obviously, Kenny McLean watched on from the sidelines. That's nothing major, but you just don't risk it, particularly at that early stage of pre-season. So yeah, that was the case with Callum Fisher.
NCFC 1902 says, all gone quiet on Brian Klug to the Pride of Anglia deal. Is that completely off now? Any sort of update, I suppose, on that? I know he's sort of been, I think, in conversation with more than just Norwich.
Yes. So no, it's not completely off. I think, as is the nature of these things, sometimes when someone leaves, and to be fair, this is the case in some employment places, they have to have a certain period where they maybe don't do anything and don't speak to people and whatnot. I don't know what the actual legal term is of that, but yeah, I think basically that might be playing out at the moment. So it might be one sort of come October time might become a bit more of interest, but there's certainly nothing imminent and close on that as things stand. And as you say, Adam, yeah, speaking to other clubs, not just Norwich, but he definitely has spoken to Norwich and is one that they would like in an academy role. I don't have any more details on what that role would be, but if it's way down the track, then it's not something that I would expect any movement on imminently, maybe even within the next couple of months.
Yes, 5:20 flight out of Norwich tonight, Harry, so we'll be over in it's about a 30-minute flight, so fairly quick. So yeah, be in Holland in a few hours' time. Bonnet saying, two questions: has Paddy got his shades in the suitcase, and are the upcoming friendlies on the Canaries TV? A few people quite concerned about where Paddy is and whether he's packed his sunshades. I suppose we'll have to wait and see tomorrow on Team News Live whether he's got them on or not. In terms of the question around the upcoming friendlies, yeah, they are going to be on Canaries TV. I think there's a bundle for £15 for both those two. So if you head over to the club's official site, then you can get all the details on that. And then to end the show with my guy Desbo's question to end the show: who's everyone's dark horse for a breakout season across the championship? I'll come to you first, Sam, because I put Connor on the spot first beforehand.
So that's what, another championship club or a player? Okay. I've seen a lot of stuff about Swansea. I think Swansea have done some quite good business so far. But that's mainly based on other people, to be honest. It's quite hard. There's so much going on in the championship that it's quite hard to track, really. Every year, I think, it's going to be the year for Middlesbrough. But they've just been sort of hovering in and around that area for such a while now. But I'll go with an original opinion rather than Swansea, which seems to be what everyone's saying is their dark horse. And I'll go for Middlesbrough because I think they've been doing consistently good recruitment work and they've got some good people there. I'm interested to see what Rob Edwards does with them. I'm not sure if he 100% suits their playing squad in terms of his style of play, but just because I think they've been doing some good work behind the scenes for such a long time and they just haven't managed to get it over the line. Maybe I'll just keep saying Middlesbrough every season until they're either promoted or relegated. So I'll go with them. What about you boys?
Connor, who's your tip?
I quite like some of the business that Watford have done, but again, it's, do you trust them to keep it together for a 46-game season? How good is the coach? I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's probably the case for a lot of the clubs. See, Middlesbrough, I'm not that sold on Rob Edwards. I could be completely wrong, but he's one that I think is in an interesting place. Cov, I think, will have a good year. It's not really a dark horse, though. I think they'll probably be tipped quite heavily. But yeah, I think it could be a good year for Pad. Millwall, I think I wouldn't bet against Alex Neil getting that going. And I think they've done, not just this season but last summer as well, done some interesting stuff recruitment wise. So wouldn't shock me if they were again in the conversation for that top 6. So yeah, probably a few there.
Yeah, I think Millwall and Swansea would be my two. I think he wanted to know maybe the breakout star, but I think we've spoken quite a lot around individuals, like the likes of Elliot Miles, and Ozcan done quite well at left back last week as well. Maybe that's one to watch, although I think Montoya had a similar feat a couple of pre-seasons ago and then was sort of never featured for the first team, so we can't read too much into it. But with that, we're going to sign off this lunchtime. We've been going for an hour or so. Hopefully we've covered as much as possible. Any questions we've not managed to cover, come back in the next week or two. We'll always doing these pretty much every week at the moment, given the amount of transfer news and business surrounding Norwich over the course of this summer. So we'll try and answer as many of them on the next one. As we've outlined, we're going to be heading over to the Netherlands in the next few hours, so we'll be out there for all the coverage of your pre-season tour. Plenty of exclusive interviews. We're hoping to maybe get a few sort of individuals in the coaching team and sort of maybe some under 21 players, some first team players, of course, Liam Manning and everything else, which will all be available on the Pink 'Un app, which you can take out our exclusive offer, flash sale offer at the moment, which is £15 for a whole calendar year. As Paddy likes to phrase, you can't even buy free coffees in a chain store these days for £15, so well worth taking that out. And we've just tipped over 11,000 subscribers on YouTube, so if you're watching on YouTube and not already subscribed, then go and hit that subscribe button down below. We do appreciate all the support. With that, we're going to sign off. We'll see you in the Netherlands tomorrow. If you're heading out there, then safe travels. If not, enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you in the next one of these.